being here. Oh, Yishakayach Reb Shaul. Good morning. Bye 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 bye. Okay, good morning, everybody. Today's class is dedicated by one of the pillars of this shir, our very own Rabbi Zriel HaKohen Engel, in honor of his birthday today, the 23rd day of Sivan. Chav Gimel Sivan, Mazel Tov, happy birthday. Your birthday? Okay, gewaldig. Larichis Yama v'shanim toivus and ashnas hatzlacha begeshem u'beruach gam yachad. And thank you very much. Okay, so we started last week a mimer on the sachim, on the libations, in Parsha Shlach. It's page 82, Likkutei Torah, Parsha Shlach. On top it says Shlach, page 82. We're holding the second column, or actually the end of the first column. In the Hebrew, it's page Mem Aleph, column 3. In the English, it's 82. On top, it should say Shlach. The first column, you see the Maimer Inyan HaNesachim, and we're holding close to the bottom of the page. As I mentioned last time, this was a Maimer that was said by the Balatanya in the winter of Tovkuf Ayin Beis, the end of 1811 or beginning of 1812, and it deals with the issue of the nesachim, the libations of wine that were brought with the karbanos, as we discussed in the beginning of the shir last week, the beginning of the maimer, all the questions that he asked about the structure of Parsha Shlach and the system of the libations of the wine and what it meant. Those were all the questions that he's going to get back to. He started to explain, the main point that we learned last time was, he started to explain that the concept of simcha, the concept of joy, is gilui ahelim, revealing that which is concealed. That's what joy is. Joy is when we remove the blockages that block our inner joy. A person has inner joy. Joy doesn't have to be created. It's not like what's going to make me happy. Things that distract me, distractions have to be created. Distractions, you always have to be created. To cover the Emaledas. the beginning of the birthday party. She could have bringing a cake. If I'm distracting myself, so then every time I have to create another distraction. But real simcha, the Balatanya said, is Gilui Helam. It's opening up ourselves to that which is already there. Now that may not be so easy. May be buried, and you have to do excavations, just like they do in archaeology. And sometimes there's layers and layers and layers, but that's how we define simcha. It's a fascinating definition of simcha, that it's Gilui Helam. This is all begin to explain the concept of wine, because all the libations were done with wine. It says in the Tanakh that yayin is mesameach elikim v'anashim. That's what it says in the Sefer Shoftim. Wine brings joy to elikim, to Hashem, and to people, which also has to be understood. And in Tehillim it says yayin yisamach levav enosh. It brings joy to the heart of a person. What does all of this mean? So he began explaining the concept of simcha as the revelation of the concealment. Then from there, in order to explain this more, so the Balatanya said that in everything in the world, his words were b'chol davar hanimtza b'metzias. In everything in the world, there's Pnimius and there's chitzonius. Yeah, you remember, yesh b'chinas Pnimius and b'chinas chitzonius. There's the inner core and there's the outer layer. But he says kol davar hanimtza b'metzias. Those were his words. Everything in metzias. In other words, there's nothing in reality that doesn't have these two layers or these two dimensions. It has the Pnimius of it and the chitzonius of it. And he defined what's the difference. The definition of the Pnimius is the way it's connected to its own source. The definition of its chitzonius is the way it becomes a source for others. The definition of its Pnimius is the way it is, what he put it, the way it's dveikus. Kabbalah's shifoi v'chayusu dveikusa bi'ilase. Receiving the flow and the energy from its own source, its dveikus, its connection, its oneness with its own ilah. Ilah means its own source, its own antecedent, its own originating progenitor. That's the Pnimius of it. And the chitzonius, he said, is the hashpah l'zulasa. The way it becomes a source of a flow of energy for something outside of it. And the two are always dependent on each other. Because when there's going to be a Pnimius, when there's going to be a real connection with the source, then the chitzonius, the way it becomes projected to others, is going to be completely different. It'll be with a different wholesomeness. This is the Pnimius because this is the inside of it, what it is. And as I gave the metaphor last time, you see it constantly. You could see it in parenting, you could see it in education, you could see it in all forms of leadership. When somebody doesn't have a Pnimius, when somebody doesn't have this attachment, this connection, so then the chitzonius tries to compensate for the Pnimius. In simple English, you confuse love with validation. When somebody didn't have attachment, they don't have consciously dveikus with their own source, so they think that the more they get validation from the outside, the more it could compensate for the lack of inner connection. In other words, the chitzonius is going to make up for the Pnimius, but it doesn't. It's the other way around. Then the chitzonius is completely wounded. Instead of me being a parent, I'm actually a child. It's fascinating how the Rebbe describes this here. In today, this language is used more often, but the 1700s and early 1800s, who spoke like this? But the Mamash describes it. Your hashpah to the other, that's your chitzonius. That's the outer self. That's the self that now becomes a source for the other. The Pnimius is my child, my dveikus, my own dveikus and my source. And it's always commensurate one another. Somebody who has a powerful Pnimius, the chitzonius is completely different. Because now I can actually be a leader. Now I can actually be a parent. If not, The 40-year-old is really the 2-year-old, which means that Tati may be younger emotionally than the child he's trying to educate, especially discipline. So imagine a 2-year-old is disciplining an 8-year-old. You know what that looks like, right? So the 2-year-old may be big and strong, but emotionally, I'm looking to my child to compensate me for what I didn't get as a child. I have no dvekas. You know, understand the tragedy of this, the dysfunction of it? And when the child, the 8-year-old, challenges the 40-year-old, who we know now is a 2-year-old, so imagine how the 2-year-old reacts, right? Now the 2-year-old has beautiful words. He doesn't say, I'm 2 years old. He has words like chinuch, this is what Hashem wants, this is my house. He has beautiful words, or not such beautiful words. I said so. Because I said so, which makes a lot of sense. Because I'm a very thought out person. And the lack of self-awareness could be alarming, and a person could live their whole life like this. It's not only true in parenting, it's true in pedagogy, in chinuch, it's true in every form of leadership. In parenting, it's obviously very obvious because it's 24/7. But it's true in leadership. That's what I told you for the Bisol Salante, Pnei HaDerke, Pnei HaKelev. The Mishnah says in Sotah, the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. So the Bisol Salante said, they say it also in the name of other Gedolei Yisrael, that it's a strange expression from the Mishnah, that the leaders of generation, that what to compare them to a dog, I mean. Okay, the Mishnah doesn't spare words, but still, it's Pnei HaDerke, Pnei HaKelev. The end of Masechah Sotah was, a lot of people just finished Masechah Sotah a few weeks ago before Shavuos. So he says brilliantly that the dog always runs ahead of the master. If you ever see people walking their dog, right? Dogs don't have patience. They don't like the kratz. So they go ahead of the master. Always, they go ahead. But when they come to a fork, they always turn around. They don't make the turn on their own. So he says, Pnei HaDerke, Pnei HaKelev. You have leaders. They're going ahead of you. They're a leader. But at some point, they want to know, Vazak Da'olam. They turn around. What do the polls say? What do they write about me in WhatsApp, in the magazine? In other words, I'm going ahead of you, but really I'm just waiting for the cue. What's more popular, what's more acceptable, what's going to make me like this, what's going to make me like that. See, that's the pshat of the Mishnah. So it always has to do with an Inyan of Pnimius and chitzonius. Chitzonius is the way I become a source of hashpah for the other. You would think that's Pnimius. That's not Pnimius. That's your outer. That's the way you become a mother, a father, a teacher, a leader, a source of hashpah. The Pnimius is me as a child, as a recipient, my dvekus in my core. How much attachment do I have to where I come from? Because that's where a person's core is formed. And the more attachment you had, the more healthy attachment you had, the more independence you can have later. In other words, when you're a child, when you were allowed to be a child, when you were supposed to be a child, you could be an adult when you're supposed to be an adult. What happens when you weren't allowed to be a child when you were a child? You remain a child, because I'm still looking to be a child. So I'm 60 years old, or 50 years old, or maybe even 80 years old. Or whatever the age, but I'm still looking to be a child. But who do I look to? Who do I look to? I look to my own children, or my own students, or my own spouse. Sometimes the husband or the wife, they're a child looking to the spouse to give them what they craved as children. Now, we don't always have ownership over these facts. The circumstances are the circumstances. But the awareness of it is priceless. Because the moment I'm aware of it, I could start saying, do I really want my 10-year-old to be my mother or to be my father? Is that fair to the 10-year-old? Just because I'm a 10-year-old, okay. So I don't have to perpetuate it. I can change the cycle, right? Generations go like this, and you could make a shift. And the shift starts always with consciousness, with awareness. Is I teufus? Now that's why I told you, real leaders, their inner life is much richer than their outer life. You think, here's a famous person, a big person, right? His life is really about the outer, what everybody sees. That's not really the life. That's why real leaders, even if you take away from them everything from their leadership, like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? If you took away everything from him in terms of publicity, what would happen? He would be very happy. Why would he be very happy? Because the whole thing he didn't need lechatchila. It wasn't like he needed the people to give him validation so he should feel good about himself. It's brought from the Baal Shem Tov that Achia Shiloini told him that because of something wrong he did, so he's punished. And what's his punishment? That he has to reveal himself. You understand his punishment? Some people will spend $100 million to be elected in a political position in the United States. And for some people, it's a punishment. Why is it a punishment? For us, it's not a punishment. For him, it was. Why? Because from Pnimius, he had to go into chitzonius. Because now, you're a leader. When you're a leader, you have to have your finger on the pulse of the people. It's a whole different world. Moshe Rabbeinu was very happy to be a shepherd. On the contrary, because the Pnimius is so solid, so therefore the chitzonius is also very solid. That was the main nekuda we spoke about. So everything has Pnimius and chitzonius. Pnimius is your dveikus in your source, and chitzonius is the way you become a source of hashpah. Let's now go. Let's see weiter. You see the line starts be'ilasoi. Pnimius ibchinas kabbalah shiva v'chiyusad v'kusad be'ilasoi v'chitzonius ibchinas hashpah luzulasoi. Chitzonius is the hashpah, the way you become a progenitor, a mashpia luzulasoi for somebody outside of you. That's the chitzonius of it. And you understand why that's called chitzonius. You would think that's Pnimius. It's not, because the Pnimius is where you come from, your source. The hashpah is already the way you're stepping out of your source to become a source for others. So even though this is where you become a source for others, but that's called chitzonius l'gabe your Pnimius, because your Pnimius is the way you're a makabel. It's like in a tree, right? What's more important, the roots of the tree or the fruits of the tree? On one hand, the purpose of the tree is the fruits. But what does it all depend on? The Pnimius of the tree, the roots. And if you make a little scratch, if you do a little scratch, right, in the root of a tree, what happens? The entire tree is going to be affected. The branches, the trunk and the branches and the leaves, the flowers, the fruits. If you go to a tree now that's a full-grown tree and you give a scratch, so there'll be a scratch. But if you blemish the root, it translates into all the results. So on one hand, the chitzonius of the tree, the fruits of the tree, that's where the tree is a lead. The tree nourishes me. The roots don't nourish me. The roots are independent. The roots are the tree itself. The chitzonius of the tree is what comes out. That's the way the tree becomes a source of nourishment, hashpah. But that's all dependent on how much it has its own roots in the earth, its own dveikus, so to speak, in its own source. That's the internal aspect of it, and that's invisible. That you don't even see. Nobody sees that. What we see is the personality of the tree, the adulthood of the tree. The tree as a child, as a sapling, when it develops through, that's all underground. Nobody even knows it. But of course, the chitzonius is completely dependent on the Pnimius. Just perhaps a mashal for what the Balatanya say. Now he starts giving illustrations, and he's going to speak of illustrations on 3 levels. He's going to speak about fruits, physical fruits, and then he's going to talk about, animals, and then he's going to talk about people, which of course works with the 3 categories of tzemeach and chai and medaber, the world of vegetation, the world of the animal kingdom, and the human being. But it's interesting, he gives examples of all these 3 for the Pnimius and the chitzonius. Yeah. It says in Medrash and Bereshis Rabbah Yud, there's no grass down here that doesn't have a mazel up there that strikes it and says grow, 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 which means the blade of grass is not the beginning of its reality. There's a mazel malmaila. We know everything is connected. So the heavenly stars and constellations, mazalis essentially was the term that the kadmonim, the early ones, used for groups of stars. You know, you have the 12 months or the 12 mazalas, they call it the zodiac. The Rambam explains this at length in Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh. You could even appreciate it today. It's not so difficult to understand. But basically, in the orbit of the sun, in the backdrop of the sun, there's different groups of stars, different months. And that's called the mazel of that month. So like the Nisan, April, is connected to the mazel called Tlek, because the group of stars looks like a sheep. And the next second month looks like an ox, Shoy. So you have Taurus, Arius, and then the third month, Sivan, is Gemini, Tu'umim, twins. Looks like twins. And then Tammuz is Sartan, is a crab. And then a lion is Of. And Elul, a virgin, and Tishrei, a scale, etc. Till the last one, Fisco, Dugim, fish. These are called the Mazolas. But essentially it represents groups of stars. So it's the heavenly constellations. So the Medrash says that every Esav is somehow connected to a mazel that causes it to grow. Which means there is an interrelationship between, just like we have on the planet, is what's called an ecosystem. And it's a very balanced ecosystem, and everything depends on each other. Right? When you're watching a lioness chasing a gazelle and killing it and eating it, right? On one hand, it's hard to see. It's not easy to see. This is what the jungle looks like, right? On the other hand, it's like a very balanced ecosystem, because if that wouldn't happen, right, all these animals would eat up the vegetation. There wouldn't be enough oxygen in the earth. It's like a very delicate. They tried getting rid of once in a particular place all the mice with cats. Yeah, you read about it. It was a churban. You have to, everything, it's with a cheshbon. It's not, there's a mashpiyah, there's a makabel, everybody gives and everybody takes. You have to know when you start changing things, in order for it to look better, you have to know what you're affecting. The climate is very sensitive and the ecosystem is very sensitive. So everything is interconnected. And it has ashpaz on this. We see it, sometimes we don't. So the Medrash says every Esav has a corresponding mazel, hamakaboy, which strikes it like down. What's he trying to bring out here? That even a blade of grass also has an ilah, also has a source. It also has a dvekus. It's not a blade of grass, it grew. There's a whole inner system. In every fruit, or every blade of grass, or tvu is grain, there's always two elements. There's ta'am apri, shu b'china ruchni, ve'etzem ha'mashas apri. You have the flavor of the fruit, which is relatively speaking more spiritual. And you have the etzem ha'mashas apri, the physical, brute reality of the fruit. One you could touch with your hands. You touch an apple, or you touch a watermelon, or you touch a peach, or a plum, or a cherry, or a blueberry, or an orange. That's the etzem ha'mashas apri. And then you have the inner flavor of the pri. For this, obviously, you have to taste it, and your taste buds could sense the tam pri. So one is like the outer element of the pri, and one is the inner element, what its texture is made up, what its chemistry is made up physically, and then also the tam, the flavor of it. But if you talk about the tam itself, there's two koiches in it. What are the two koiches in it? Two koiches means two aspects, two dimensions. Koyach lekabel shifoy min koichvei marim shehim amatzmichim. The koyach in it, to receive its shefa, its flow, min koichvei marim, from the stars in heaven, which are matzmichim, which are responsible for growth, like Moshe Rabbeinu says in Parshas V'zeh Sabracha, mi meged tvuis shemesh, umi meged geresh yirachim. From the sweetness of the grains that come from the sun, umi meged geresh, and the sweetness of other grains that comes from yirachim, that comes from the moon, v'chein kol koichav prati matzmiach esav prati. This is fascinating. Every star, individual star, is connected to an individual esav, to an individual things that grows. You know, today they're learning every day, every week, how many stars there are. It's beyond what anybody ever imagined. You're talking about billions and trillions. So he says here, every esav is connected to a particular koichav. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying. Meged tvuas shemesh, the tvua and the flavor of the tvua, meged means sweetness, is connected to the shemesh or to the yereich or to the moon or to other stars. This already says in Zoyar, Chelik Beis Kuf Einal, he speaks about how every star corresponds with a different Esav. So when you look at the tam of the pri, every fruit has a different texture, a different chemistry, and a different flavor, whatever it is. More sweet, more sour, a combination of sweet and sour. And it's magical. I mean, when you think about it, the same earth and the same sun, and you put in a different seed, and suddenly you have a whole different reality, and it nourishes the person in a different way. I mean, we take these things for granted. You go to the supermarket, you pick up an apple, you bring it home, and you eat it. But you shouldn't. You should marvel at it. That's the idea of the bracha. It's the same earth, the same sun, the same air, the same light, the same oxygen. You put in a different seed, and suddenly it's a whole different reality. It's a whole different texture. So he says here a moedidike thing. When you're tasting it, there's two koiches. One is the way the taste is mekabel from its source, whatever its source is. That's one Inyan. And then there's a second Inyan. And that is the hashpa of the fruit. The way it gives the flavor into the physical fruit. That's already the second. Which one do we connect to more, the Pnimius or the chitzonius? You understand what he's saying? It's the edelkeit of how to eat. When you're eating something, there's a flavor. What flavor are you experiencing? The Pnimius or the chitzonius? The chitzonius of it is the way the flavor is mashpia into the physical fruit, which is the physical flavor. This is an orange, this is a peach, this is a kiwi, this is a cantaloupe, this is watermelon, this is a lemon. Or any other food. It could be cabbage or lettuce or kale or cucumber or a tomato or raspberry. So that's the way it's makabel from its source, and it becomes a mashpia that in the physical fruit you have this and this flavor. But that's only the chitzonius. The pnimius of the flavor is its connection. Which star does it come from? In other words, to go back and feel the mucker, the source of the tam. That's already the pnimius of it. V'chein gavoya me'al gavoya. It's an expression in Kayalas. It's higher and higher and higher. What do we mean higher and higher? It doesn't begin with the fruit. In the mazel itself, there's two levels. There's the way the mazel, the star, is mashpia, and the way the star is makabel, yet from a higher source. And a higher source, and a higher source. The mazel also has a mazel, and another one. So in every Inyan, you could look at the chitzonius. The chitzonius is the way it's manifested in that which receives from it. In one case here is a physical orange, the etzem amachos apri, which received a flavor from the inner chemistry of this fruit. But when you're tasting the flavor, the pnimius of it is really to be able to sense the inner energy. And that's always more abstract, it's deeper. And in that itself, there's gavoya mayal gavoya. Higher and higher and higher, all the way to be teifes, the ruchnius of the tam. It's a very, very edel way of eating, you understand?
When you make a bracha, you have what to think about.
You see here, you see, especially in Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe's Maimarim, and Bechlal in Chassidus, you see, it opens a person up to Olam Haza in a much deeper way. Sometimes people think that with Yiddishkeit, and with Pnimius HaTorah, you have less Olam Haza. So everything is a lakus, einoid mulvadim. It's the other way around. When you're eating, you could be eating b'chitzonius, and you could be eating b'pnimius. Just like when you hear a niggin. Right, there's different layers of what you hear. What he's saying is, when you're tasting the food, you can actually taste the tam, not just the chitzonius of the tam, but there's the pnimius of the tam. And that is the way it's receiving from its own source. It's a sensitivity. Just like when you're connecting to a person. Right? You connect to a person on the outside, what you're telling me, and you could connect to the inner energy that the person is connected to. It's a whole different level of connection. So here, actually, in eating, what are you tasting? I could just taste, okay, this is what the orange tastes like. Or you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into the Pnimius of this flavor. This taste doesn't come from nowhere. There's the flavor on one level and another layer, another layer, another layer. No, the Bavigdor Miller was talking about the Nefloyas Haboyre, Posha, to understand the miracle of science, what we call science or botany, not to take it for granted. Yeah, here he's talking the next level. The Bavigdor Miller was trying to explain to people the process of what happens when a fruit tree grows. You know, we eat an orange, next. You know, you ate an apple. He says, understand what happened. You're drinking milk, understand where did this milk come from? That cow ate grass. The cow ate grass. What did the cow eat? Grass. And suddenly you have milk. Where do you get milk from? So there's a whole factory inside the cow, yeah, that takes this grass, and part of it becomes fat, and part of it becomes meat, and part of it becomes blood, and part of it becomes milk, and it becomes a whole source of nourishment for humanity. Who created that factory in the cow? For us to create such a factory, we have to train people for who knows how many years and how much money and how much resources. And then you plant a little seed into the earth, and suddenly, yeah, different seed, and this little seed suddenly knows everything, how to do everything. It's like as though he sat in university for 300 years and learned chemistry on a PhD level, but not just chemistry. So many other things. He has to know genetics, and has to know biology, and has to know cellular biology, and has to know about the sun. And he produces it, and then it comes packaged, and it even changes its color when it's ripe, so you could know that it's ripe, and it even loosens its grip. You know, when a fruit becomes ripe, the grip becomes looser, schwacher, so you should be able to take it off, and it changes from green to another color to tell you, now I'm ready. And it's usually a beautiful color, so it should be attractive too, because he wants to be attractive, like a kalam, a tachosin, that says in Medrash. And therefore, now go take it. So that's what he was, so that's all, yeah. It is a story it tells. But this story comes yet from a deeper story. That's the Pnimius of it. Depends, just like taste buds. Some taste buds only taste potato chips. Anything above potato chips, they're not goyders. There's taste buds that potato chips is cucumbers, kale, celery, and then there's taste buds that are sensitive to deeper levels of tam, yeah.
It's like hearing. Can you hear someone's pain?
Huh?
Can you hear their pain?
You can hear the words, or you can hear what's behind the words, and you can hear the source of the words, etc. The same is true with music. In every Inyan, there's the Pnimius and the chitzonius, everything. We're talking about our tish now. Same is true with an animal. Every animal could be a dog, could be an elephant, can be a deer. There's the pnimius of the animal. What is that? The ruchnius of the animal. An animal has a spiritual consciousness. That's the dveikus of the animal in its own ila. What's its own ila? Pnei aryeh, pnei shor shebemerkava. In Yecheskel Hanavi's vision, it says, in the chariot of Yecheskel, he saw a merkava, a chariot, which was carrying the kisei hakavod. This is in the first chapter of Yecheskel. It's the Haftarah of Shvuos. Maftirim b'maiseh b'merkava. It's called maiseh merkava because it's a chariot. So what does Yecheskel see there? He sees four faces, and he sees the face of an eagle, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of a person. So it's explained in Kabbalah and Ichsidus that Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Shor shebemerkava is kenoida shepnei Aryeh hu mekor nefesh hachayis, uPnei Shor hu mekor nefesh habehemis chuli. V'hachayis shemechayis guf u'psar habehem u'bchinas chitzonius. The face of the lion is the spiritual source for the souls of all the undomesticated animals, including the lion. That's why the Gemara says that the Aryeh is melech shebechayis. The king of the jungle, the king of chayis is the lion. The king of behemoths, which are domesticated animals, is the ox. The king of birds is the eagle. And that's all in the Merkava. What's the connection? The king is not just detached. A king is like the leader. So the face of the lion is the source of all the nefashos, all the souls that go into the chayas. The face of the ox is the spiritual source for all the chayas that goes into the behemoths. And the face of the eagle is the spiritual chayas for all the souls that go into the eagle. So when I'm looking at an eagle, or I'm looking at a lion, or any animal, again, the chitzonius of it is the way the chayas comes into the gufa behemoth, which is what I'm seeing right now, the way the animal is behaving, what the animal needs, where the animal goes, the nature of the animal, which is fascinating. That's the chitzonius of the animal. That's the way the chiyus is manifested in the physical animal, which is already chitzonius. Why? Because that's the way it becomes a source of leadership for the next level. What's the source of the animal? Its own dvekus in its own ilah. The animal itself. So it's a sensitivity to a different layer of an animal. You could look at the animal just because what do you see? So you just see an animal, which is tremendous because it's the life force that's giving life to the guf and the basar behema. That's already called chitzonius. That's the way the chiyus that was davuk in pnei aryeh becomes a source of hashpah for the guf, for the physical animal. You understand what I'm saying? The Pnimius is the way it's davuk in its own ilah, just like in a person. That's what he says. So v'achayis gufu basa beimah b'chinas chitzonius. That's already the hashpah l'zulasai. That's already the second level. Al derech zeh b'chinas nefesh adam. The same is true in a person. Shoydeshu pnimius hanefesh davuk bilasai b'chinas pnei adam lekabel chiyusai. V'chitzonius hanefesh hu hashpah shemachayis haguf. In the soul of a person, you have the same nekuda. The source of the person is the shoyrish hanefesh, again, like the roots of the tree. You have the roots of the soul, where your soul is connected to, the attachment of your soul. That's called pnimius hanefesh, the way you're davuk in your own source. My soul doesn't come from anywhere, from nowhere. And spiritually, it's pnei adam, that's the face of Adam. To be receiving your chiyas. In your source, you're always like a makabel, because you're like a child receiving that connection, that source, that oneness, your attachment with who you really are, where you come from. And then what's your chitzonius? The way the nefesh becomes a mashpia for the guf. That's the chitzonius of a person. The chitzonius of a person is the way the soul becomes a leader. What does it mean it becomes a leader? It becomes a parent. It now gives life to my physical body. That's the chitzonius of the person. The pnimius of the person is the way the nefesh is davuk in its own ilah, in its own source. Yeah. How do you apply this to the eating experience? We'll see. We'll see. You want to know practically how to eat? Oh, it's a lot of mindfulness here. First of all, you have to have self-respect. Without self-respect, you can't even begin to deal with this. Because without self-respect, when I'm eating, right, the food is controlling me. So, b'chlal, no pnimius, no chitzonius, I'm just hungry. When you eat mindlessly, which we often do, especially if I'm starving, right? You didn't eat a whole day, you come home, you see a pot, boom. So I'm saying, the first thing is we need self-respect. And then you have respect for the food too. If not, I'm using the food and the food is using me. There's no relationship. It's like we're exploiting each other. Huh? Double abuse, yeah. You abuse the food and in the process it abuses you. What you don't like to be done to you, don't do to others. You don't want to be abused, don't abuse the food. Food also has an energy. That's a very big lamaisa, yeah. It's an element of self-respect which allows you to respect the food too. I was once eating, I was once eating when the following story happened. So I was continuing. So my wife tells me, "You're not full already?" I say, "Yeah, but there's still food on the plate." So she says, "You can put it in the garbage." I say, "I don't want to put it in the garbage." So she said, "It's important to respect your body more than you respect the garbage." Because you don't want to put it in the garbage, you're going to put food in the garbage, so where do you put it? You put it in your body. So she says it's good to respect your body more than you respect the garbage. But of course it has nothing to do with that, right? It's binging, it's a form of addiction. Yeah, so the way the nefesh becomes a leader, a mashpia, to give chiyus to the guf. That's the person. But that's the chitzonius of the person.
We see the opposite, that the give overpowers the nefesh. The nefesh of Bahamas overpowers the nefesh.
No, he's talking even the nefesh of Bahamas. Even the nefesh of Bahamas here. Everything has pnimius and chitzonius. Everything, a grass, a fruit, a tree, an animal, the nefesh of Bahamas too. There's the way the nefesh of Bahamas is in its source. How connected is it to its source? That's its pnimius. And then the chitzonius is the way it becomes a father figure or a mother figure for the guf. And it gives the guf. Just like in a person, let's talk parenting. That was the mashal I gave before, right? What's your pnimius? What's your chitzonius? Your pnimius, who you were as a child. Or I should say, who you are as a child, because we never cease to become children. We never cease to be children. Who you are as a child and who you are as a parent. Which one is Pnimius and chitzonius? You would think parent is Pnimius, child is chitzonius. It's the other way around. Who you are as a child, that's your Pnimius. Who you are as a parent, that's your chitzonius. Why? Who I am as a child is where I come from, how I am attached to my own source. Who I am as a parent is how I become a source that affects others. So that's always stepping out from my inner core to become a source of effect. And again, the deeper I'm connected to the Pnimius, the more the chitzonius is going to be wholesome. Because it's going to receive its nurture from the Pnimius. But if I have no Pnimius, so fruits are always connected, they don't have an issue. Although you can abuse plants too, but a different level of abuse. You know, I don't know if you ever saw, there was an experiment they once did with different plants. You saw? And they were treated differently by the people who planted them. There was a plant that was spoken to beautifully and treated with dignity. And then there was another plant, somebody was cursing, and it's a fascinating research. And literally the plants received the same physical nourishment, but they came out differently. This is a research that was real. I mean, I read about it. It's fascinating. And my point is you can abuse plants too.
Water.
Huh?
The water. Change the molecules.
Yeah. But in a person, you see that it becomes very clear. The deeper the Pnimius is nourished, the more the chitzonius could be wholesome. Because if not, what often happens is, as I said, the chitzonius compensates for the lack of Pnimius. So again, what the Alter Rebbe is telling us, don't look at these things superficially. It's very sensitive. It's extremely sensitive. As a speaker, yeah. This is the biggest challenge with every speaker. Every artist, every speaker. No. The Zog is good. You're asking a good question. The Alter Rebbe had a son, his name was Reb Chaim Avram. He had 3 sons. His oldest son was Reb Doiv Ber, Rabbeinu Doiv Ber. He became the Mittler Rebbe, Rabbeinu Doiv Ber. He had a middle son, Reb Chaim Avram, and a youngest son, Reb Moshe. Reb Chaim Avram didn't speak a lot. He looked just like the Balatanya. He looked like him. And he had a Arichas Yamim. He lived relatively long. He was in the time still of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the grandson of the Balatanya. And they always used, and he lived in the city of Lubavitch, and they always asked him to say something. He grew up by his father, and he wouldn't speak. Once they nudged him, that Shalashudis, he should say something. Not his own, say over from the... So he agreed. So a big oilam came, because it was a psachidush that he's going to speak. Came the time, and everybody was looking at him, and they saw that he's going through a lot. And he opened up his mouth and he said a pasuk, Bilibi tzafanti imrasecha leman loy echtalach. And he didn't say another word. You know the translation of this pasuk? Huh? Bilibi tzafanti imrasecha. In my heart, I concealed your words in order for me not to sin to you. Bilibi tzafanti imrasecha leman loy echtalach. And he didn't say a word. Now, what you have to understand, what was he going through? He understood the moment you speak, it's already going away from Pnimius to chitzonius. He was sensitive to it. It wasn't a big nisayon by him, fakert. It's like he didn't want to. He felt he's doing an injustice. L'man lo echtalach. It's a form of a chet. Not a chet as a sin. You're hurting somebody, but a chet as, what does a chet mean in Hebrew? Koleya al asayra v'lo yechter. Right? It says about Shaul, he was an archer. He always hit the target, v'lo yachta. He never missed. Yeah, chet means you miss. You miss. What's a chet? We touch chet as a sin. The real touch of chet is you missed the target. You missed the point. You understand? You're standing at a chuppah, right? You're standing at a chuppah, the chassan, and you're on your phone. You understand? You missed the point. You missed the target. You have an opportunity to sit in the presence of maybe the greatest person of the generation, and you're busy checking a website. Did you do a chet? You missed the point. That's the idea of a chet. You're not aligned. You're not aligned with the energy. L'man lo yechtalach. He didn't want to step away from the world of Pnimius. Oh. So you have different neshamas. I guess he felt that this was not his shlichus. But we have to respect where he's coming from. You understand my point? Okay. So now you have the opposite. There's the famous. So what's the balance? He says he never met a Chabad shliach to ask him to speak, and he says, "I'm not speaking." There was a Yid who told me, Reb David Cohen is the Rav of Gvul Yavitz in Flatbush. I forgot who told me this. He said he was upset at a simcha, so somebody asked him to say something. So he got up and he said, this Baal Simcha thinks that a rabbi always has something to say. And he's right. And he started to talk. Of course, there's another nakuda. If a parent, let's talk about a parent. If a parent says, "Oh, I'm not done with my Pnimius, so I'm not going to parent you." I'm sorry, because I'm still a child, we sometimes feel that way. So I don't want to parent you. I want to still be a child. L'poil, now you're a parent, you have a responsibility. So you have to parent, but you have to be self-aware and work on yourself. The same is true in the Inyan. A person, we live in a generation where for a person to say, I'm going to be quiet, just like I work on my Pnimius, is not the right thing. Because it could be an Inyan of Atzalus Nefashos. Reb Chaim Avram felt, it's not Atzalus Nefashos. They want to hear me, they won't hear me. But if it's an Inyan of Atzalus Nefashos and Gashmius and Ruchnius, you have to speak. Like the Gemara says in Megillah, right? You remember the Lashon. Mila b'sela, mashtukin b'trei. One word is worth a sela. Silence is worth 2 slayim. So there's a famous vart. Somebody said that's true. But if you're silent a whole day, you only get 2 slayim. If you speak many words, every word you get a selah. So silence is much better than words. But silence is too sloyim. That's the story they say. I once read of that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there was a Yid by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he asked him to talk about something. He was a Baal Hashpah. So he said, Mila b'selam ashtuke b'trei. So he told him this. That's what I read once years ago. Then I saw it from somebody, whatever. But the Nekuda is clear. So you have to appreciate this. But sometimes I can't afford. I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to parent. I'm not going to talk to anymore. I'm just going to go into, I'm going to retreat and I'm going to become silent for Pnimius. That itself could sometimes be an Inyan chitzonius. It's running away from responsibility rather than going into Pnimius. The pshat is that my chitzonius has to always be balanced with a self-awareness. So a person who speaks and speaks and speaks and speaks and there's no reckoning, there's no cheshbon hanefesh, was du sagst, wenn du sagst, it affects the quality of what they're saying. It's not two divorced worlds. The Pnimius comes out in the chitzonius. The more wholesome the Pnimius is, the more the chitzonius will be a flow of it. If not, the chitzonius becomes a compensation, and then you're never really being mashpiyah. You're being makabel, and it distorts the message. That's why people who are in the public, whatever type of public eye, as speakers, as teachers, as Rosh Yeshivas, as Rabbonim, as Manhigim, in the world of politics, in Lahavdil, in the world of Kedusha, whatever world it is, they have to make a cheshbon hanefesh much more than everybody else. They have to have much more, because if not, the messages get distorted. Not even consciously. Not necessarily. I'm not talking about corrupt people who are actively corrupt. I'm not talking about that. Unconsciously, they become distorted. Because I need you more than you need me. So I'm being a mashpiyah, really I'm being a makabel. So I'm just telling you things in order to be able to compensate. It becomes very complicated. That's in parenting. It's one of the hardest things to be able to parent with emes. Right? Because we have all these fancy words that we can all quote. Kabbalah savicha v'esimecha, Kabbalah soil, you're a child, you have to respect your... It's beautiful stuff. But sometimes I'm using these beautiful concepts to camouflage my own unresolved tension. So it's not about your benefit. Kabbalah savicha v'esimecha ultimately is about the benefit of the child. But what if it's about my own insecurity? So it's a whole different thing. So I use these words in order to put pressure on you to be maybe inauthentic, so just like I should be able to feel better about myself. So who's the parent? It takes so much inner clarity and discipline and truthfulness and humility to be able to step away from my own fears and insecurities and ego and be able to ask not what my child can do for me, but what I can do for my child. That's what parenting is. It's real parenting is stepping away from my needs for your needs. That's what a leader is. That's what Malchus is. That's what a leader does. That's what a leader does. Am I ready to do that? Or do I say I'm still 3-year-old, so I need you to give me, and that's what my parenting is. I'm a baby, but don't call that parenting. It becomes very hard. That's why you have to be so aware of your triggers. When your child says something to you, and by the way, this is not just your child at 10 years old, even more when your child is 20 years old, and 30 years old, and when your child is 50 years old, even more. You're already Rabbi shel kol bnei hagoyla, shnayid mit allein geweisse Bart, yeah? Allein geweisse Bart, shkoyach harav Greenwald. And this 50-year-old should know better, and he speaks to me, yeah? Kine taiva kovid mitzinas adam in ha'olam, yeah? Kine taiva kovid, not only when I'm 20, also when I'm older I have these things. And you become triggered, but it's pasnish to say I'm a yid with a long white beard, or a short white beard, or a black beard, or whatever it is. I'm not talking about the beard. It's a pasnish for me to say, well, there's something unresolved. Yeah, and I was matzliach in business, and Torah, gdula b'makam echad. But the truth is, in some ways, if I can admit I'm a child, and this is unresolved, and you just triggered me in a very deep way, and I could be curious, and I could be aware, And then you can make a choice and respond from a place of attachment and connection rather than from a place of distortion and guilt. It makes sense what I'm saying? And then I impose guilt on you, and we're both miserable. So self-awareness is very, very important. Did I answer your question? I did, perfect. It says, Nafshi yotze bedabre. Yeah, the Navi says, Nafshi yotze bedabre. What does that mean? So there's two taichin. One is, my soul came out when I spoke. You spoke with your nefesh. You didn't just speak like a robot, like artificial intelligence. Nafshi yotze bedabre. There's another taich. I saw it from the Tzadik HaKoyen of Lublin. Nafshi yotze bedabre. My soul left when I spoke. Nafshi yotze bedabre. There were only words. There was no soul. Nafshi yotze bedabre. So on one level it means it was insincere, but he's saying something much deeper. It could be sincere, but because I'm speaking, something of the nefesh went out. Because it can't be the same level of dveikus. In other words, real speaking is a form of mesiras nefesh. Real speaking. I know not all speakers feel that way, but real speaking is if it's real speaking, it's almost as if you're a pnimi, because you're stepping away from pnimis and going into chitzonius. So why? The answer is because you're called on to be a leader. You're not just called to be a makabel. If I wanted to be a makabel, the neshama could have remained pregnant in the Ein Sof, and then it's a makabel. But Hashem sends down the neshama to do something.
So it means it can be a better mashpia if you disconnect from the source? Or
You'll never be a better mashpia if you disconnect from the source. But all hashpah, if it's real, is a form of not disconnecting, but it's a form of stepping out, not disconnecting. Stepping out of the source. If I'm pregnant in my mother's womb, I can't be a mashpia. Somebody once asked an interesting shaila. There's a din of kavod talmidei chachamim. Yeah. Pnei seva tokum v'adarta pnei zoken zeh shekana chachma. The Gemara says in Kedushin, a talmid chacham walks and you stand up. There's different levels in halacha, hilchos talmud. There's different levels, but that's the nekuda. The Gemara says in Nida that a child in the womb of its mother learns the whole Torah. So he's the biggest talmid chacham that who ever existed. Better than Google. Yeah? Malam denoise kol Torah kul in the womb of its mother. So the Torah, should be a chiyuv to stand up. So when you see a pregnant woman, obviously if she doesn't have a chair on the bus or on the train or whatever, obviously you give her a chair. That's basic menschlichkeit. But I'm not talking about mitzvah. I'm talking about kavod talmid chacham. The answer is, that in the womb, sa'alz fazich. It's still everything for itself. So ultimately, we're called on to give. That's the process. We were once children. Our parents were once children. They became parents. And then one day we become parents. And we hope our children continue that shalshelas. But if you detach it from the womb, from the dveikus, it becomes, it's flawed. It's very flawed. But whenever there's a hashpah, there's always a danger. The drasha zal sein b'tatzlacha. The Gemara doesn't make a difference. The difference the difference between the male and the female is that the male forgets it. That the malach bob satri up if mashak choy. So the boys forget it, the girls remember. It says Shalom Zachar. The Pnisha writes in Torah, why you make a Shalom Zachar? Because he's an Avelus, that he forgot the whole Torah. So somebody asked me, why don't you make a Shalom Nekeva? So I said, because she doesn't forget. Women b'chlal forgessen nicht, emes? You ever saw women forget? So you think they forget the Torah? They don't forget a thing you said 29 years ago. So you think they forgot the whole Torah? Yeah. But Malach Satri al Pivim B'Shakchai. Yeah. It was a big pella by the Rebbe. Because till the Rebbe became Rebbe in 1950, 51, he Mamish almost didn't say a word. I heard from people who were in New York before, and he barely said a word. And it was natural for him not to speak. There's a letter from his father-in-law, the Rebbe Dayatz, to him, and he says, why don't you write me letters often and tell me what you're doing, what you think? And he writes back to him. He says, there are people who live on the outside and there are people who live completely on the inside. And he said, I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying I'm that type of person. And he says, I don't have really what to share. And he says, whatever I share, it's going to be boring. He says, there's not a lot going on. So he writes to him. He says, is it going to be, and therefore I don't have what to share. It's all inside, and you could see it. He once wrote to Rabbi Yankov Landau, the Rav of Bnei Brak. Rabbi Yaakov Landau was the father of Rabbi Moshe Landau. The Rav of Bnei Brak for many, many years. He wrote to him in the 1940s. He says, Meila mi ichabnish ken chush en askanas tziburis. Abadu hast ya chush en askanas tziburis. So why don't you do more? So for a person who didn't have a chush en askanas tziburis, which means doesn't have a talent for public work, it's interesting, right? But you saw. But the point is that when he started to speak, it's a different type of talking. If by nature, you talk, you're already born, you started to talk. So then it's more, okay, fine, so it's more natural. But when your whole nature is not that, and then you're talking, so why are you talking? Because you feel that it's a shlichus, it's a whole different thing. It's not that you need it, it's not like it's even natural for you. So you're touching on something very, very, very real. So such talking comes from even a deeper Pnimius. You understand? It comes from an inner calling. It comes from an inner. It's not I'm compelled or there's a compulsion there or that I need it for something. It's completely like a choice that comes from feeling that this is your shlichus from Hashem. It's a whole different type of talking. So that talking, the chitzonius mamash comes from the Pnimius. I remember growing up, sometimes the Rebbe would have very long fabrengens. You can have a fabrengen 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. And these fabrengens were not a few short vertlach. There were a few nigunim in between. But the sichis, my marim, were long. It could be an hour and a half, close to 2 hours. You can have a siyam on Shas, a siyam on Masechtas, Rambam, Zoya, Kabbalah, Chassidus, Pilpul, Sugis, Rashi, Hashkafa. It was long and hard and complicated and intense, and it went for hours, for hours. And then the Rebbe would finish the Fabrengen. And I heard it, and whatever I understood, and it was such a tainig, it was a pleasure. And I would always marvel, he would finish the Fabrengen, and either go to Daven Mincha or Daven Maidev, whatever this man was, or go out. And when I saw he got up to Daven Mincha, it was like, usually when you finish such a presentation for hours, and it was transformative and brilliant and ingenious, so you're waiting for a little feedback, you know what I mean? The Rebbe would finish the Fabrengen, he would go for Mincha, and it was though there was nothing happened. Like, next, boom! There was like no, I would always marvel on it. He wasn't like trying to live off the previous energy in the next moment. He finished the Fabrengen, now it was Mincha, and I would, does the Rebbe want feedback? Does he want to hear from somebody how it was? You finished 6 hours, you want to hear, wie es gewesen, Hanagat, nicht Hanagat. People. It was a fascinating thing. It was like right back to where he was without any strings attached to let me live off now from the previous moment. And right back to your Pnimius, right back to his Pnimius. You understand what I'm saying? It was fascinating. I always saw it. much more comfortable. I don't know, more or less comfortable, but it was like, it was back. It wasn't feeding off. I just have to take a minute break because I have to call my son because he needs to get a lift to yeshiva. So give me a moment. Just want to finish a few more lines. This? Yeah, he's on his way. He told me on my way. He wrote to me he's on his way. I'm in shul. 18. I'm almost finished. Yeah, I took a break. My kind students were very gracious. They allowed me to take a break. I just wanted to make sure everything is fine. You have your tefillin? Snacks? Okay. Have a beautiful, beautiful day, and asachat Shlach. I love you. Okay, bye. So he's there yet? Okay. He wrote to me on my way, so. Okay. Did you sleep enough? Okay, Baruch Hashem. Okay, I'll see you. If there's any problem, call me. Unschuldigt. We're talking about parenting, yeah? So I didn't want to be a hypocrite. Let's learn another few lines. Anyway, everybody understands the Inyan here? V'chein b'malachim ksiv. By malachim it also says, u'mekablen dein min dein. What's prat u'mekablen dein min dein? We say in Uvalotzion in the morning, right? You remember? Uvalotzion in the morning. What do we say? We bring the Navi. V'ata kadosh yoshev Tils Yisrael. V'kara ze'el zeva amar. Kadosh, 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 Hashem tzvayis melech haaretz kvoideh. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya. What does it mean? V'kara zel zev amar. One calls to the other one. So we translate it in Aramaic. Umekablin, dein min dein, v'amrin kadosh, shmei Elah, right? Kadosh, kara zel zev amar is mekablin, dein min dein, v'amrin kadosh. And then we translate the next words. Kaddish the Marim and Malia Kalada Zivikare, then Batiseni Ruach, the next pasuk. What's that? Mekablan Dain Min Dain Vamrin Kaddish. The Karazel Zeh doesn't mean they call out to each other. What do you mean they call out to each other? Hey, Michal, wake up! What's Karazel Zeh? Mekablan Dain Min Dain. So the Rebbe teaches, Her Ataich. Shehakoyach sheyesh b'malach loimer Kaddish hu mekabel milmayla. The power of the malach to say Kaddish, he needs to be at Mekabel from somebody. The malach also has a source. The grass has a source in the star. The star has a source in its mazel. Its mazel has a source. The pasuk in Koheles, Perikei says, Gavoya me'al Gavoya. There's higher and higher and higher. Ugvoya maleim. And then that just was higher above them. That's called Ishtalshalus. The evolution of energy from mother to child. The child becomes a mother to the next child. The child becomes a mother. On one level you're a child and then you become a mother. So the malach is a child, umekablin, and then that malach could become a mashpia to the next child, to the next malach, to the lower level. You understand? So the ability to say Kaddish, the malach has to get from somebody. Nobody is created in a vacuum. Nobody is kan nimtze kana, you emerge independent. Independence is a fallacy. Attachment is the core of reality. The more you're attached, the more you can be independent. The more you have healthy attachment to your source, now you could say Kaddish. Mekablin, there's always there's a din of Mekablin. But v'noisnim gamkin rishu zelazeh. Now you have the opposite. In davening in the morning before Shema, what do we say? You remember? Umevarchim, umeshabchim, efarim, aitzam adishim, Hashem akel hamelech hagad lagibeh v'neira, v'chulam, mekablim aleim, oil malchus shamayim zemizeh. What's the next line? V'noisnim, ba'ava. I know Nusach Ashkenaz is a drop different, but not in this nekuda. V'noisnim ba'ava, rishus zelazeh. What's happening? First you say, Mekablim zemizeh, then v'noistim reshuz. I receive, and then I give permission. So he says, Shehu b'chines hashpa'aseh l'malach, acher zuloseh ha-mekabel shrifay memenu. Noistim reshuz is where you become a mashpia. Mekablin is where I receive from my source. So why do I have to give you permission? I give you permission means, what does it mean he gives a reshus? What's if the malach gives a reshus to the other person, to the other malach? You don't have my permission? Sorry. V'noistim reshus zelozeh. Lahakdish liyotzram. Without my permission, you can't sanctify your creator. B'nachas ruach, b'safa v'rura, b'nim ha'kdosh, kulam ke'echad oinim be'ema. What's pshat v'noistim reshus? Noistim reshus means, it's fascinating. You're giving permission. In other words, without your permission, they won't be able to do it. That's the idea of empowering. Obviously, if you feel you need my permission without my permission, you can't do it. So why do they need permission from another malach? The answer is, let's go back to our mashal with children. Children need somebody to believe in them, to give them permission to shine. If you didn't give your child permission to shine, what happens? He remains stifled his whole life. If all I could tell you is you're a loser, you're a nobody, can I tell the story with Binareno, Biskaneno? There was a child, he asked a question. You know what the question was? In yeshiva, he asked a question. He was in second grade. They learned Parshas Boy. In Parshas Boy, Moshe tells Pari, Binarenu, Biskanenu, Nelech. B'banenu, b'bnoisenu, b'tzainenu, b'b'kairenu, Nelech, yichag Hashem lanu. So he asked his teacher, why does it say Nelech twice? It says, B'narenu, b'skanenu, Nelech, b'banenu, b'bnoisenu, b'kairenu, b'tzainenu. It should have said Nelech once. I think it's a good question. The teacher, I don't know why, probably didn't have an answer. So he made fun of the question. He said, this question you'll ask by Manishtana. You'll do a fifth question by Manishtana, you'll ask this question. And he made a joke out of it, and from that day it became a joke whenever a child asked a question that people perceived as stupid, which means usually that they don't have an answer. So they called it Binarayni or Biskanayni. That was the question. That was a mashal for a stupid question. And this man told me that since then he never asked a question again, because he was humiliated. So when he told this to me years later, I told him he should call his teacher and ask his teacher if the Klayaka was a stupid person. You should ask him. Why? Because the Klayaka asked the question. Klayaka asked the question, like long Klayaka over there. Thank God the Klayaka didn't have a teacher when he was in second grade who told him he was stupid for asking this question, because then there would be no Klayaka. Thank God the Ramban and the Rechaim also didn't have such a teacher. What's my point? You can empower a child or you can stifle a child. The Noistim Reshus doesn't just mean ich gebe dir Reshus sagen Kaddish. The Noistim Reshus means you become a mashpia. What's the definition of a mashpia? You give permission for people to shine. Probably the best definition of hashpah. You give permission. People need permission. Why do they need permission? Because they need to be empowered. They need to feel the confidence. They have to feel that you believe in them. So, that's what he says. No, that's hashpah. He says that's because that's what empowerment means. Because empowerment doesn't mean I give you power. You don't need my power. It means I give you permission. Because you could make a mistake. You could think empowerment means I give you my power. I don't give you my power. I give you your power. In other words, I give you permission to exercise your power, to flex your muscles. That's what empowerment means. Empowerment doesn't mean I transplant my personality into you. I turn you into a shadow, an extension of me. That's the opposite of empowerment. Real empowerment means, can you give permission to your children or to your students or to anybody you meet to shine? It's really permission. The right word is permission. We look at permission as just, I give you permission. Permission is a very deep thing. What happens when you don't have permission? You feel inside, I'm not allowed to. Isn't that what so many people feel? I'm not allowed to. That's the word. I'm not allowed to. Why? I'll disappoint. I'm going to make a fool out of myself. I'm going to embarrass my family. I'm going to embarrass me. Yeah? I'm going to get everybody angry. Whatever it is. In other words, you need permission to shine. You need permission to cast your light. So the Alter Rebbe says, Mekablen dein min dein, that's the Pnimius of the Malach. V'noisnim reshuz elazeh, that's the chitzonius of the Malach. And look what comes first. V'chula mekablim or noisnim reshuz? First is always mekablim. V'chula mekablim oil malchus shemayim zemizeh. Every malach is somebody, has a parent. And then, v'noisnim ba'ava reshuz elazeh. And you'll see in Nusach Svard, they put in the word ba'ava, right? I don't think it's in every Nusach. Somebody davens Nusach Ashkenaz here. You say v'noisnim ba'ava, v'noisnim reshus, right? Yeah. This is a Nusach Svard. Nusach Harizal for sure, but I think also Nusach Svard, yeah? Somebody davens Nusach Svard, not Nusach Harizal. Ah? They don't say v'noisnim reshus elazeh? Yeah, they do. That I saw myself. Yeah. You grew up with Nusach Ashkenaz, no? It's gefährlich. V'noisnim, what's the ba'ava reshus elazeh? You can give reshus ba'ava, you can give reshus without ava. You can give reshus. V'noisnim ba'ava reshus elazeh. It's metageshmak. When Yehoshua tells Moshe Rabbeinu to incarcerate Eldad and Medad, Adoni Moshe Kloyim in Parshas Baloischa, last week's parsha, because they're saying prophecy without permission. Yeah, Eldad and Medad, two Nevi'im. You know, they suddenly emerged as prophets. So what does Moshe answer? Hamekane yatali, u'miyitin kolam Hashem Nevi'im kitin Hashem esruchei aleim. You're jealous for me? You're getting jealous? You think I'm jealous because there's other Nevi'im? My wish is that the whole nation should become Nevi'im. Kitin Hashem esruchei aleim. You don't understand. This is not a mishpacha business. I'm the Navi, everybody's under me. I want everybody Jew to be a Navi. That's Moshe Rabbeinu, right? You see Moshe. Umitin kolam Hashem Nevi'im. What do you think? I'm afraid of two people who are prophesizing because I'm going to lose my job? My salary is going to be cut down because Eldad and Medad do a better job than Moshe Rabbeinu. The Shabbos HaGadol Drush is going to go to them. You got the wrong guy, Yeshua. I never chose this job. I'm not in a control business. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu, if I could speak so in one of his finest moments, what he's thinking. I don't mind if there's 40 million prophets. Miyitin kolam Hashem Nevi'im. That's the impression you get from all the Maimonim in Likkutei, right? Miyitin kolam Hashem Nevi'im. I'm not trying to keep the code. You know, a programmer, you have a patent and you keep the code to yourself. And if you pay me enough money, I'll give you a little bit of the code and lease it to you for 3 months. That's normal in the business world. But if you're so connected to the source, you're not into that. The moment you start owning God, obviously you don't have God. It's ego. So miyitin kolam Hashem Nevi'im. So Amelev and Noisnim Reshus is already the next level. This is true in all the Hishtalshlus, in all the evolution of all the worlds. This is Pshat in Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is the Arizal. Chaim Vital wrote the Arizal's works. So there's a Lashon in Eitz Chaim. Shekol ha'ishtalshlus ila v'olalu mebchinas chitzonius. Eitz Chaim is classic Kabbalah. Things are written very cryptic. So there's a Lashon in Eitz Chaim that Reb Chaim Vital wrote from the Arizal, that he heard from the Arizal, that the whole Ishtalshelus, the whole evolution, Ishtalshelus comes to word Shalshelus, the whole chain of Ila and Alul is always chitzonius. What's Pshat? What does the Eitz Chaim mean? The whole evolution from Ila means the source, Alul is the child. Ila is the antecedent, Alul is the offspring. Ila is like the seed of the apple tree, and Alul is the apple. And then the apple has a seed which becomes an Ila for the next apple tree. That's called Ila v'Alul. Adam and Chava are the Ila of humanity. Right? The child of Adam and Chava is the Alul, and then he becomes an Ila, or she becomes an Ila. That's how Ila and Alul work. Thoughts and words are Ila v'Alul. The thoughts produces the words come from the thoughts, but then the words produce actions, etc. So the Arizal says the whole ishtalshelus from godliness of Ila v'Alul is always from an external place. What's Pshat? What's Pshat? The Ila would never become an Ila for an Alul if it wouldn't go into a place of chitzonius. When the Ila is in a state of Pnimius, it never becomes an Ila. Why? Because it's davuk to its source. It's mekablen dein min dein. It's like a child connected to the parents. You can't get married when you're 2 years old. Why not? The tachlis is pru or vu, so you're born and get married. We all know. By animals, it's much younger, right? A few weeks later, boom, leave. There's many animals that they become independent very fast. With children, if they're independent at 40, you're lucky. The pshat is, if you weren't mekabel, you can't be noisin. If I didn't have the ilah, the connection to the ilah, I can't become a mashpia. So the more pnimius, the more chitzonius. But this is a nekud of chitzonius. Because if not for the chitzonius in every pchina, what's the chitzonius? The ability to go out of your organic connection to your attachment. To be mashpia, there wouldn't be the whole seder ishtalshalos. In other words, if you would remain in a realm of pnimius, what would happen? You just remain davuk. There's an expression in Hilchis Taruvis. ID in the laws of kashrus. ID the tarid lemivla loy polit. Alter Rebbe brings it in my modem. It's fascinating how he uses this. It's an idea in science, and when you're absorbing, it's negeya to the halachas of blood, hilchas melicha. So Chazal say when you're busy absorbing, you don't loy polit. You don't expel. You don't emit. You don't spit out. I did tarid lemivla loy polit. So it's negeya lahalacha, but negeya kashrus. When you're being baileya, you're not being pilot your dam to the other food. So the Alter Rebbe says in one of the Maimarim, when you're in a place of bala, you're absorbing loy palat. You can't be mashpia. So to be mashpia, you have to go away from mivla. To go away from mivla, you're going into chitzonius from pnimius. Here's the klal. Anybody who gets their whole life from chitzonius, it's because they have no pnimius. That's why if you ever find yourself in a crazy, crazy desire to talk and control and get validation from others, you have to always go back and see, what am I missing? Because it's going to be distorted. You understand what I'm saying? What's so funny? Because I'm talking about it. Because the guy who doesn't stop talking is talking about this.
I'm thinking about myself.
Oh. Wow, that's already a good thing. That's a good thing. After so many years, you started to think about yourself. Huh? That's good. That's a compliment. Finally, I got a compliment, yeah?
How does a person know that it's time for him to be mashpia? It's time to go.
How do we know? I guess the hashgacha elyoina, I guess we have to look at our age and our circumstances and our abilities.
As long as you have something to say, to share, you can't be mashpia?
Yeah. The Rebbe used to say, Aleph, teach Aleph. Beis, teach Beis. I don't have to know Aleph to tough to teach Aleph.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't fool myself and say, just because I'm teaching Aleph, it means I know everything. You have to. Sometimes you're right, but the deepest Yerid is sometimes the deepest Aliyah.
So by the Rebbe, was it the same way? The fact that the Rebbe started coming out.
Of course, it brought out a whole new depth. But it was a Yerida. It was a Yerida. He always felt that it was a Yerida.
The noise that has to come to you.
I heard from him. I remember once at a Fabring, and he said, Lama ze anoichi. I remember, Lama ze anoichi. Für was kann ich nicht sitzen, für was kann ich nicht sitzen bei mir in Chede und davenen und lernen? Lama ze anoichi. I heard it myself.
Also said that after 3 o'clock in the morning, the Rebbe had to speak to him. Went into the room, the Rebbe opened up the Gemara and says, now
Okay. Who said that? Moshe Hurst? Really?
But a makabel has to come to you. You can't grab a makabel.
You can't force a makabel to be makabel. So that's the nekuda. So the whole ishtalshalus of ilah va'olol and eitz chaim is always chitzonius. But that chitzonius is what allows for ishtalshalus. It's like if we're only pnimius dik, you can never become a parent. So the whole evolution is always from b'chinas chitzonius. Harei shebechol nimtzayim yesh b'chinas pnimius. So the nekuda, the summation is in all the nimtzayim there's an inyan of pnimius. Shehu miloshin ponim. The word pnimius comes from the word ponim. What does the word ponim mean? What does the word ponim? So usually people say ponim comes from the word pnimius because in your face you could see the insides of a person. The deeper parts of a person's personality usually expressed in the face, like more than the back or the legs or the arms or the chest, like a person's eyes and a person's nose and a person's mouth and a person's brain. It's all in the area of the panim, and that's where you can hear the person, you could see the person, they can express themselves. Usually panim is connected to pnimius because that's where an inner part of a person comes out. But here the Alter Rebbe teaches something else. Panim shepirush loshen poina. The word panim comes from the word poina. Poina means when you turn, like when you tilt your body or your head in a certain direction, right? Ki panu elai. There's an expression in Yirmiyah, Perek Beis. Panu elai oidev v'loi panim. They turn their back to me, not their face. Or there's an expression in Parshas Kairach. Al teifen el minchasam. Moshe tells Hashem, don't pay attention to their mincha, to the gift of Kairach. Al teifen. So the word panim comes from the word poina. Why? Physically, because if somebody calls me, right? Somebody says, yeah, Yosef Yitzchak Jacobson. What do I do this to them? Or you put up your foot to them? You don't do that. What do? You turn your face to them. You turn your face. You don't turn your back to them. You don't turn your hand to them. I mean, unless they want to pass you something. So which part of you tilts itself and turns to somebody? If I want to talk to you or you're calling me, it's always my face. So the pashtus panim is meloshen panim because that's the part of the body that you turn to somebody summoning you or calling you or wanting to speak to you or communicate to you. But now let's take it on a deeper level. Based on the idea that the Pnimius of every yin is pchinis kol ilah. Every ilah which is every source. Poina turns and connects to his ilah, so that's your panim. And chitzonius is when you turn away from your ilah and you focus on your alul. So what's your pnimius? The part of you that turns upwards to your source. It's poina to your dveikus, where you come from. What's your chitzonius? You turn away instead of absorbing. Now you become the mashpiyah l'chutz. So Pnimius is always poina. You're always poina. You're always searching for my own mucker, my own shayrish. That's Pnimius. You hear the definition of Pnimius? Miloshin poina. That's Pnimius. Chitzonius is, I go out of that and I become projective. So now I'm not being pointed to my source. On the contrary, I become my source. I become the source. I'm now the source. I'm now the mashpiyah. You're the makabel. In Pnimius, I'm the makabel. The more makabel, the more pnimius. The less makabel, the more chitzonius. You would think it's the other way. No, because you're more makabel, the more you're actually connected to your own inner energy. Because remember, the more attached we are to our source, because we're all come from somewhere. So the more you're attached to your source, the more your core is wholesome. Because your core is an alul from an ilah. So the more alul, the more powerful, the more wholesome. Now you become an ilah, which is you step away from your source and you become a mashpi, you become a parent. That's the chitzonius. So it's a fascinating description. If you talk like in parenting or a teacher in education, or let's say a leader of a company, right? Your chitzonius is how you're leading the people. Let's say how you're parenting your children. What's your pnimius? Your pnimius is, what about your child? How is your inner child? And the depth of that insight is so marvelous, it's so powerful, because the more you're aware of that pnimius, the far more effective is your entire ability to lead. The less you're aware of it, the more blinding is my ability to lead, because it's like severed. Now this is also connected to Panim Milosh and Pnimius. Why? Because the deepest part is the part that's Poina. So the pshat here in Panim Milosh and Poinim, Milosh and Pnimius is connected. That's what the Mittler Rebbe in his Maimer explaining this Maimer says. The Pnimius is the Poina, because that's the ilah at its core, at its inner core, like the baby when it's fashioned at its core is Poina to its mother, to its father. But the Alter Rebbe says, "V'yesh pchinim memutzas." There's something in the middle. What's the middle? There's something in the middle between the two, and this is where the drama happens. V'yesh pchinim memutzas. There's something right in the middle. Shehu b'pchinas atzmius shemechaber beis hakoyches hanah. There's where you come from. There's what you create, and then there's you. P'chinas atzmius. P'chinas atzmius means wer bin ich? Who is my essence? Shemechaber beis hakoyches hanah. Atzmius always connects these two koyches. There's the fruit, the tam apri, the way it comes from the star. There's the tam apri, the way it comes into the physical fruit. One is a makabel, one is a mashpia. Makabel and dein v'noisnem. And then there is, and who am I? There's who my parents are, there's who my children are. You can't live off either. And who are you? He calls it atzmius. That's a third element. First he spoke Pnimius and chitzonius. Between Pnimius and chitzonius, there's who did you become. Because if I am only the source, then I'm not me. Pnimius is the way I'm davuk in the source. Chitzonius is the way I become a source for influence for you. The way I pass on the energy to you. And then there's the pchinas, what he calls pchinas atzmius. Shemechaber beis hakoyches hanah. Which connects these two koyches. Just you see in the parentheses, after he quoted the Eitz Chaim, parentheses from the Tzemach Tzedek, after he quotes the Eitz Chaim, that all ishtalshlus is chinas chitzonius, he says, Ritzoynoi loymar, sheseder ishtalshlus u shechitzonius ha'elyon nasa pnimius l'tachten, mashenken pnimius ha'elyon eine yored l'mata l'tachten. What the Arizal really means is that only the chitzonius of the elyon becomes the pnimius for the tachten, but the pnimius of the elyon doesn't go down to the tachten. What does this really mean? That in leadership, there's an inner core that doesn't come out. It remains connected to the source. If the whole Ilah of Allah is based on chitzonius, it means the chitzonius of the Ilah is what becomes an Ilah for the Alul, and it creates the Pnimius of the Alul. So now the Alul's Pnimius relative to the higher level is only chitzonius. You understand what he's saying? So for what one level is Pnimius, if you go to the next level, that's only chitzonius. That's why the Baal Shem Tov said, every question he has an answer, but for every answer he has a question. Why? Every question I have an answer. If we go to a higher level, there'll be an answer. But if we go to yet a higher level, it's going to be a question. So if the chitzonius of the Ilah becomes an Ilah for the Alul, so where does the Pnimius remain? The Pnimius remains Davuk. That doesn't come down to the Alul. So what comes down to the Alul? The chitzonius of the Ilah. So the Pnimius of the Alul is really the chitzonius of the Ilah. You understand? Because the Pnimius of that Ilah doesn't become an Alul. That's why the Arizal says all the shtalshus comes from chitzonius. So now you can understand what Pnimius means. On one level, I may be reaching my Pnimius, but if you go deeper, it's all chitzonius. Because my Pnimius, which is my dvekus in my Ilah, I'm only connecting to the chitzonius of that Ilah, which became a source for me. And then if you go even further, right? You go to the Pnimius of that Ilah, which is already much higher than the chitzonius, but that Pnimius is connected to its Ilah, which is only its chitzonius. The moment you know this, you can already reach much more Pnimius. It's the edelkeit of it. It's the edelkeit of it. It's not trying to put down the... But this also means something else. Why is this so important? This means that the leader's life inside is much more richer than outside. That's what I said in the beginning of the Shir. Because where is his Pnimius? His Pnimius remains in Dvekus. You never sell your Pnimius. You never project your Pnimius. Why is that so important? Because the real job of a leader is to be there for the people. So it's always about what the people need. The real job of a parent is to be there for my child. My child is not my therapist. My child is not the person with whom I'm supposed to work through my Pnimius. You understand? My dveikus needs to be intact. That's my Pnimius. Once my Pnimius is intact, now I can be a leader. A leader is always chitzonius, because a leader is always, what do you need, not what I need from you. Fakert. If the Pnimius is healthy, there could be healthy chitzonius. If not, there's a confusion. Suddenly, you're not my student, you're my teacher. I'm the baby. That's why real leadership, when you go back to your regular life, it's very rich. It's more rich. You know why? You're back into Pnimius. He goes back into his davening, into his learning. This is where it is. You teufus? Fakert. What makes leadership powerful is that it's only chitzonius. Not in a bad way. Because you're in touch with what the people need. You're not busy working out your own intimacy. You can't be a child as a leader. But when you're talking to Hashem, you want to be a child. Of course you want to be a child. You don't want to be you want to be a child. There's a mechitza in shul, right? You don't sit in shul with families. People sometimes have tinus. Why can't you sit with a family? So on one level, I explain to people. On one level, people say, I come to shul. It's like you go out with your family to lahavdil game. You sit with the family. Why in shul, the women here, the men here? It's not nice. Why are you separating families? So I explained to them, what happens if a single person walks into shul? What happens if a divorced woman walks into shul? What happens if a divorced man walks into shul? What if a widow walks into shul? What if a widower walks into shul? Everybody's sitting with families, Baruch Hashem, and you're the only one, you have to sit alone. Everywhere they feel alone. They go to a restaurant, they feel alone. They go to a game, they feel alone. They go to a mall, they feel alone. So why not make one place, Hashavo Mashve, that even a single person who's never married, for whatever reason, could feel dignified? Where's your sensitivity? Where's your sensitivity? At least one place. In the presence of God, let everybody feel equal dignity, even if I have no family. Or chas v'shalom, the person, whatever happened, let them feel dignity. But it's much deeper than that. It's not just a nice way of getting out of the question. It's a real thing. The point is, in the presence of Hashem, everybody is a 1-year-old child. You're not a married person. You're not a patriarch of a big family. That you'll be afterwards. Now you're a 1-year-old. Everybody is naked before God, like when you came out of your womb. Now you're in a place of Pnimius, not chitzonius. Shul is not a place of chitzonius, it's a place of Pnimius. Now you're davening to Hashem. Ve'eshpoiches nafshi lifnei Hashem. Nara yisi. You teufus? This is not a place. This is not a place where you're leading. This is a place where you're being makabel. You're opening yourself up to your Creator. So it's not a place to emphasize people's success stories. There'll be a place for that. You'll come to work, be a leader. You're a CEO, take charge. Zaya mensch. But now, strip yourself from all your titles. Become spiritually naked. You teufus? Huh? The inner child. The Shem Yishmael writes in Parshas Vayigash, Eich, Yehuda tells Yosef, he doesn't know he's speaking to Yosef, he thinks he's speaking to the Egyptian prime minister. Eich el avi, hanar einenu iti. So he says in the Zohar, it says that the nar is called the neshama, the inner child. It says, Eich el avi. How could you go to your father, to my father, hanar einenu iti, and the child is not there? The inner child. So now we understand what it really means. Hanar einenu iti, which nar? The mekabel, the Pnimius.
You're saying all this stuff in philosophy. Really, the last part is much more than the intermediate part. It's more Pnimius in the last Shlosh.
Oh. Now you're talking a whole different Inyan. Mitzad, what's the kavanah of Hashem? Okay, we'll get that. In order to get to that place, you have to first go through this. You're right. There's a word from the Alter Rebbe, he once said, the erste mitzvah in Torah, what's the first mitzvah? Prurvu. Literally it means a mitzvah to have children. First mitzvah, Parshas Bereshis. So he said in Yiddish, but you understand about it. He says, what is the erste mitzvah in Torah? Ayid daf machen noch ayid. Alter Rebbe Zavart. Ayid daf machen noch Ayid. That's the first mitzvah. You're a Jew, mach noch Ayid. That's Prurvu. He's saying the Pnimius. What's the first commandment in Judaism? You're a Jew, make another Jew. Because that's the ultimate kavanah. The Hishtauschlich, the ultimate kavanah. But the process is Pnimius and chitzonius. The truth is, the deepest potentials of people come out when they're mashpia. Because no, it's seifim betchilasam. Mitalmida yosem mikulam. But in order to reach that space, you first have to understand this whole process. You understand what I'm saying? So you're right what you're saying. Mitzad the kavanah sabriya, the real kavanah pnimis was to go to the chitzonius.
But even in the chitzonius, there's more pnimius than there is in the one before.
And if you remain a selfish pnimi, it's not good. If the pnimi is sorry, I can't help anybody. I'm too loyal. I'm too honest. That's why you have to be careful with silence. You know, when people say, sorry, ich hab nicht was zu sagen, ich hab nicht was zu sagen, ich hab nicht was zu sagen, you have to know if it's Pnimius or it's a different type of chitzonius. Ich hab nicht was zu sagen. You know, when somebody gets up and says, I don't know why they asked me to speak, and I'm thinking, I also don't know. And then, so you say, you know what, don't speak, I have a great idea. If you don't know why they asked you, so take, don't speak, just say Mazel Tov, and then suddenly a nest happens, like Hanukkah. He speaks for 8 days. He doesn't even have 5 minutes what to say. Nasa by Nes, and 8 days later at Etnach. 2 hours later at the Sheva Brachas, he's still talking, but he didn't have what to say. Right? So if you get up and say, I don't have what to say, so it means two things. First of all, that you don't have what to say, and second of all, that you shouldn't say. So not always does this humility translate into Pnimius. Sometimes it's just a form of worse chitzonius. You understand what I'm saying? He's talking here real Pnimius, real dvekas. It's not like part of the game that you're supposed to say, I don't know. I don't know why they invited me. Huh? That's what the Medrash says. More than the calf wants to nurse, the cow wants to give off milk. Because the Pala has a responsibility as a mother. Okay, Mamish, another 2 minutes. I know it's late. So we learned that panim is miloshin panu. Now he says something amazing. Yesh loymar, sheshloisha b'chinas elu hein chabad chagas nehi. We know the whole tree of the spheres. There's chachma bin adas, there's chesed gvura teferes, there's netzach chayd yisayid. Chabad chagas nehi. What are these three categories? These are the three categories: Pnimius, chitzonius, and atzmius. Chachma bin adas is the way you're nurturing from your source. Chesed Gvura Teferes is who you are. Netzach Chayd Yisayid is what you become for others. That's the picture of the Svidus. So it's three categories. So Chachma bin Adas is the Dveikus in the Ilah. And then Chesed Gvura Teferes is the I that is Davuk in that Ilah, the I that forms. Right? So in a child, you have the child, their attachment, the umbilical cord to mommy, physically and spiritually. In the fruit, it's the dveikus with the mazel. In the animal, it's the dveikus with the merkava. In the nefesh, it's the dveikus with pnei adam. In the malach, it's the dveikus with the malach above it. And then you have chesed gvura teferes is who I am, and netzach chayd yisoid is how you become a mashpia. That's leadership. Leadership is always defined by netzach chayd yisoid. And it's connected to the names. I'm not going to now get in barichas because it's a whole Inyan. But chachma bin adas is always about understanding, awareness. Chesed gvura teferes is your emotions. And netzach chayd yisoid is how you impact other people. It's even inside yourself you have these three things. Chabad is where you come from. Chagas is who you are. And that's a chayd yisoid is how you become a mashpia inside yourself. It's not only to other people, it's also to yourself. It's three completely different modalities. Chachma Bina Das is your inner awareness of everything. And that's always defined by your attachment. Always. To put it in simple words, we usually define who we are based on the information and ideas that were passed on to us. And that's the Chabad. That defines the nature of your dveikus. That gives rise to who you are as a person. What type of attachments you have, what type of rejections you have, what type of chesed, what type of gvura, what type of teferes. Netzach Chod Yesod is how that translates into functionality. How you actually create functional decisions in your life. Whether it's more netzach, it's Chod Yesod. And the Balatanya says, V'gimel b'koiches elu imchinas Avram, Yitzchak v'Yaakov. And that's why there were three fathers. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Ki Avram, b'chinas chesed. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line there. Ve'efshe shezo gam ken inyan shebechol kli yesh gimel b'chinas pnimi emtzoi chitzon shesimonam seiser soif toich rosh. Kabbalah, it says every keli has three dimensions. Pnimi, emtzoi, chitzon. Pnimi is the dveikus, emtzoi is it itself, and chitzon is the way the keli becomes a source for someone else. Like when a keli has a handle, it's called in halacha the yad, or the chitzon of the keli, because that allows me to gain from the keli. Right? Then there's the keli itself, and then there's where the keli is makabel from. Every keli of water is makabel. Every cup of wine was makabel from a chavis, which came from grapes, which came from a tree, which came from seeds. That's where the keli came from. Then there's the keli itself. And then there's the handle of the keli, which allows me to take this pitcher and pour it into my cup. That's the chitzon of the keli. And that's called seiser. Soif, toich, rosh. Rosh is the head, the dveikus. Toich is who you are, and soif is the end, where you become a mashpia. V'yashleim b'gimel kachzen b'chinas Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. Avram b'chinas chesed u'mayim sheyordim u'maylu b'chinas koyach hashpa. Avram is defined as chesed, kindness, or mayim, schor of nimshach acherecha kamayim, water which always flows downwards. That's the koyach of hashpa. Yitzchak b'chinas eish shetivay lalos. Yitzchak is fire, always wants to go up. In other words, Yitzchak wants to go away from hashpa. Avram is the ultimate leader, extrovert. He speaks and he teaches and he's mashpia. And Yitzchak always wants to go away. Yitzchak is silence. Yitzchak goes back to the source. Yitzchak is called an oila tmima. He can't even leave Eretz Yisrael. Yitzchak is a carbon. What's a carbon? Carbon is, he goes in the fire, goes up.
He laughs but doesn't talk.
He laughs because he doesn't talk. Yitzchak remains on the Akedah even after the Akedah. Physically he came off the altar, but spiritually he remains an oila tmima. He remains a carbon. And he's the p'china of Eish. What's Eish? Eish always goes upwards. That's why Yitzchak's one activity in Chumash is he digs wells. What does wells do? It removes the cover-ups and it gets to the Be'er Mayim Chaim. It gets to the well springs deep in the earth.
Which Avram doesn't have.
Avram also dug wells. His wells were ultimately plugged. But Yitzchak's main vocation in Chumash, one thing he does, the only thing we know about Yitzchak is he's chayfa be'eris, which means he's going away from the chitzonius, going to the Pnimius. It represents Yitzchak's soul. And then you have Yaakov. Yaakov ubchinas b'riach hatichin shemavriach u'mechabe beis hakoiches kechad. It says in Zohar that Yaakov, it says by the Mishkan, there's the bar on the right, the bar on the left, that were connecting the beams. And there's the b'riach hatichin hamavriach min hakotza lakotza. It goes from one side of the wall to the other side, and in Zohar it says that it actually circled all the walls of the Mishkan. In other words, binakatz lakatz means all the walls. So he says Avram is the p'china of chitzonius hashpa. Yitzchak is the p'china of pnimius. He's poina lamaila. That's Yitzchak. Midas hagvura. Avram is ava, Yitzchak is gvura. Avram is chesed, Yitzchak is gvura, yira, awe. That's the concept of awe. When you're in awe, When you're in reverence, you're always in a state of bittul. Look, you're like mesmerized. You're in awe. Ava is fakert. Ava is giving, projection. It's projecting love. Awe is in a state of silence, of reverence. What's Yaakov? Yaakov is in the middle. It's the emtsoi. It's the atzmius. It includes Avraham and Yitzchak. So Yaakov is the Bria Chatichen, meaning he goes up to the highest, min akotza el akotza. Because what's the atzmius? The atzmius, real atzmius. What does it mean a person has an atzmius? What does it mean you have a core? So Alter Rebbe says it means you have a core, that you connect your Pnimius to your chitzonius. That's what it means you have a core. You're connected to your Pnimius, and it extends min akotza el akotza. That means you have a, you say this person has a core. Probably every therapist should know this. What does it mean a person has a core? You have a core. You have a healthy core. You know who you are. You know who you're not. What does it mean? It means you have a relationship with your highest Pnimius all the way down to your ultimate chitzonius. There's a relationship. There's a bria chatichen. You understand how much self-awareness you have? You could see in every projection who you are in your deepest place, and your deepest place, you also know how to come out and be mashpia. That's the centeredness of atzmius. Atzmius doesn't mean I'm a child. Atzmius doesn't mean I'm a parent. Atzmius means while I'm a parent, I'm a child. I'm a parent and a child. I'm an adult and I'm a child. I'm young and I'm old. There's moments I'm connected to my source and there's no projected I. And then there's moments where I'm called upon. In other words, you can navigate the various elements in your personality. That's atzmius. Because atzmius means you're mechaber both koiches. Because atzmius is that which is mekabel from there, and it's mashpia to there. That's the pchin of Yaakov. Yaakov was the one to bring together Avraham and Yitzchak. Now, isn't it interesting that Yitzchak is the child? You would think it should start with Yitzchak and then go to Avram, right? It should start, Avram is the father, Yitzchak is the child. So you would think you start with Pnimius, Mekablen Dein Mendein, Mekan then Neusnim. So l'chayda, Yitzchak should be before Avram. No? What? Then comes for the next. Right, so that's the vart. That the whole system of Ilah va'olol is chitzonius, meaning Avram's Pnimius is Avram's Pnimius. Avram as a father is hashpa, and that's the first Jewish father. Avram is the first Jewish father. He wasn't born a Jew. He's the first Jewish father. The first Jew who was born as a Jew is Yitzchak. He had a bris at 8 days. So Avram as a father, right, he begins as Ilah for the Olol, and then Yitzchak is the first Jew who becomes the Pnimius of that. But the process of Ilah v'Olah, as we say, started with chitzonius, not with Pnimius. The Shtalshalus starts. There's also maybe another point, and that is sometimes our children are the ones who really help us see our Pnimius in ways that we can't see it on our own. In other words, this is one of the blessings of having children. If you're a real mature parent, you teach your children and you also learn a lot from them. Because from the way my child responds to me, I could learn a lot about me. You know, it's very easy to blame my child and say, oh, you're chutzpinyak, you're not grateful. But very often, it's not that. Very often, the children are just responding to truth. So it's an opportunity, your child's an opportunity to go back to your own Pnimius. Because very often with ourselves, we don't know. We don't know what's happening. You grow up, yeah, it's good. You become a child, you become a father, you become a mother. suddenly your children start reacting in very interesting ways, not always the ways you expected or you wanted. And what happens? You could get upset at them, or you could say, wow, what's happening inside of me that they're responding to? And you may become so much more authentic because of that. You get what I'm saying? Or not?
The same. It's not another thing.
Huh?
The same. The Pnimius doesn't leave until the chitzon
What?
is expressed.
Which Pnimi doesn't leave?
Pnimius doesn't leave, is never leaves until the chitzon is expressed. Only through the chitzon will you ever recognize your own Pnimius.
So that's what I'm saying. That sometimes the Yitzchak says, Eila, this is Pshat. Eila told us Yitzchak ben Avram. Avram hoiled us Yitzchak. So it could be like this. Maimah, we have a very deep shot. Rashi says, why does it say twice? Yitzchak ben Avram. This is the story of Yitzchak, the son of Avram. Now something else happens. Avram hoiled us Yitzchak. By Yitzchak being the son of Avram, Avram can give birth to Yitzchak. It redefines Avram as a father also. But first is Avram, then is Yitzchak ben Avram. No. Sometimes when I see what type of son I have, who's Yitzchak ben Avram, you could say, wow, what did I give birth to? Did I maybe give birth to something based on my own lack of Pnimius? Which means I have to go back to the father. Instead of going to the child, maybe you have to go back to the father and say, who did I give birth to? In other words, what was involved in this hashpah? Was this hashpah coming from a chitzonius that was devoid of Pnimius? So Yitzchak gives Avram the ability to give birth again to his son by giving birth again to himself. Okay, enough said. This shir went much, much longer than I expected.
The question answers the question. What came first, the chicken or the egg? It's Mam's the answer.
What's the answer? What came first, the chicken or the egg?
What's the answer?
What?
Egg.
Reinvents the chicken.
Invents the chicken.
Very good.
It's the bird.
The chicken came before the egg,
And the
but
egg
through the egg,
reinvents
there's a new chicken.
the new chicken. That's the bird.
The chicken asks, hey, why is my egg cracked? Why is my egg dirty? The egg is a mechutzev. No, the egg is not a mechutzev. The egg came from somewhere. Maybe you should look at the source of the eggs and then you'll fix your eggs by fixing yourself. Some parents get very, very upset when we say this. They say that we're justifying a spoiled generation of entitled kids who have chutzpah and don't have kibbud of aim.
Fix the parents.
But I disagree. And I feel that when we as parents get upset at this message is because we're not ready to look at our own truth. Does anybody disagree with the fact that we may also be wounded? That we're not the best, most perfect people who ever lived? It's not about judging parents, it's about self-awareness. Proof in the pudding is that when you work on yourself, everything in the house becomes better. Children are happier, the parents are happier. There's more Yiras Shamayim in the house, not less Yiras Shamayim. There's more Avos Hashem. There's less uptightness. There's much more flow. People don't have to get offended from this. It's like, this generation, we blame parents and the kids are the tzaddikei ador, even though they're hefke jungen and they're frivolous and they're anarchists and they're self-centered and they're entitled, and why can't they learn from us? Look how loyal we are to our parents. And I say, your kids are telling you just because you're traumatized and just because you're in fear and you were never honest with your parents, that's why you want them to be the same. They're giving you a gift. It's the gift of geula, it's the gift of redemptive consciousness, it's the gift of expansiveness. It doesn't mean that children always make the right decision, but what it means is that so much of what's happening, we could look at ourselves, and if we can help ourselves, we can help everybody around us. But it's a very humbling experience, because for this you have to say, maybe I have to have empathy on my own mistakes and my own deficiencies and my own wounds. Smaska?
It just goes so fast, it's very hard to.
It goes very fast, that's true.
It's hard to catch your breath.
It's hard to catch your breath, that's true. And we have to have compassion for that too. Everyone has to have compassion for the fact that we're not perfect and we make mistakes. But mistakes are not the issue. Mistakes are not the issue. Shgiyos miyavin. Everyone is supposed to make mistakes. Unless you're not human. Human beings make mistakes. It says tshuva. It says in Medrash, Hashem created tshuva before He created the world. Why did He create tshuva before He created the world? Because He knew He's creating a world where people make mistakes. The problem is not making mistakes. The problem is if I don't learn from my mistakes, if I start idolizing my mistakes and worshiping my mistakes, and my mistakes, instead of looking at them and saying, I made a mistake, it's your mistake. And then you can't learn, you can't grow. It's a rachmanis. I get emails from people, quite a few people, parents, and they get very upset. They're like, you speak of these things and all you're doing is emboldening chutzpah and motivating children to rebel and alienate themselves. Of course, children, adults are responsible, just like parents are responsible for themselves. As we grow up, children are also responsible for themselves. But I would say that at least in many, many cases, not in all cases, but in many, many cases, right? Sometimes the inability of us as parents to be introspective, to be curious, to learn new things, holds back so much of the relationship that we're capable of having with our children. Sometimes there are children who grow up and are in the same position. They're not ready to learn anything. They're not ready to be curious about themselves. So it's not a blame game. It's a journey into awareness. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov.
And our children have those same levels up.
Everybody does.
Yeah, so you can't relate what's good for one child is not good for the next one.
Emes. The more you could connect to your own Pnimius, the more you could connect to other people on that level. Right? The more I could connect to my inner child, the more I could connect to my child's inner child. But if I'm not allowed to connect to my own inner child, how can I connect to my child's child? I'm only allowed to connect to the adult inside of me. So I'm only allowed to connect to the adult inside my child. So when my child is being a child, what happens? I can't deal with that. Because I was never allowed to connect to my child. You know how tragic that is? My child is hurting. I'm not allowed to hurt. I was never allowed to hurt. So how can my child hurt? So what do? I explain to my child how their hurting is stupid. Grow up, baby. Or I'm thinking that. But if you would be able to connect to your own child, you could connect to other people's children. To the child inside of other people. Eich el avi v'anare nenu iti. Okay. Based on a shiur that spoke a lot about not talking, I think there was enough talking, no? Huh?
They don't have a book. There's no book. No one's got published a book.
This is the book.
That's the book.
This is the book. How to raise healthy parents. I told you a teenager told me, very good. There was a guy in the kitchen here. I was taking one day over here where they served the soup. So a teenager comes, he says, you know, Rabbi, why? It's not easy raising parents today. I'm like, you got it. It's not easy. The parents are resisting. We don't want to go to school. We already graduated school. The last nevuah, the last navi in Tanakh is Malachi. Malachi is the last navi. In the second beginning of Bayit Sheni. Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi were Nevi'im Achronim. The last nevuah of Malachi. What's the last nevuah that Hashem left to the Jewish people? Literally the last nevuah. Hineni shalech lechem es Eliyahu hanavi lifnei boya Hashem hagadol v'hanayra v'heishiv leiv avos al banim v'leiv banim al avosim. Taich Rashi. What prat v'heishiv leiv avos al banim al yidei banim. Before the Geula, the hearts of the parents are going to return to truth through the children. The last prophecy of Hashem. V'heishiv leiv avos al yidei banim. You hear? So that's the nevuah. People don't realize. That was the message. Parents can do tshuva through their children. Tshuva doesn't necessarily mean tshuva on a sin. The whole concept of tshuva, return to emes, to pnimius, to dveikus, with the Rebbeinu Shalom Ayidei Bonam. It's a blessing when you could see that. Instead, what do? What do some people do? The worst children in the world, spoiled brats. I should have spanked them. Some stupid teacher told me not to hit my kids. I should have done what they did to me. And then my house would have been a Gan Eden. Sure, would have been a fake Gan Eden. It's called a concentration camp. You were Zoicha to be able to create a real Gan Eden. What's a real Gan Eden? Place of emes, place of Pnimius. This doesn't mean someone is going to write to me, oh, so now you kashered everything, there's no discipline anymore. Of course there's discipline. Discipline is important, but discipline has to come from Pnimius, not from chitzonius. Discipline has to come from a place of connection, of love, of attachment. Not discipline because I'm an angry, impulsive human being who's in a very, very sad and despondent and depressed place, and I'm just acting based on impulsivity, and I'm not reflective, and I'm not curious. Discipline needs to come from a place of attachment, of trying to be there. Discipline needs to come from love. If it doesn't come from love, it's dangerous. Right? Okay. Since today is your birthday,
Wow.
so it's an opportunity to be reborn, back to
There's
Pnimius.
a yontif, by the way. There's a yontif by Megillah. Megillah, the Rebbe said today.
It says in Sfarim that this is a mini Rosh Hashanah. It's a personal Rosh Hashanah. Mazali Gaiver. So it's Ani Ayoim Ilideticha. Vayikosvu Sefer HaMelech.
What?
So now I'm saying a birthday is a time you can go back to the Dvekas, where you come from. But Mela there could be Pnimis, but Mela there could be Atzmis, but Mela there could be chitzonius. So out of his birthday.
Rabbi, we also read the rights today. In the Megillah, it says in the Megillah, there's a yontif.
Hmm?
The Rebbe says, whatever you ask for today is fulfilled.
Yeah. I know the Sikha, yeah. I was there, yeah. Shloisha Vestrim Bay. Okay.
You want to send it to you?
Tomorrow morning there's a class for women at 9:30 a.m. and we will resume this Thursday morning 7:45 Be'ezer Hashem.
I don't know if I have it. You have it? Do you have mine? When this says nice and shazel azeh, don't you have to be one? Doesn't one malach have to be higher than the other to give the other one permission?
Yeah. Mekabel and Daim and Daim can only happen when one malach.
Right, but no, I'm sorry, not mekabel them. Nice and shuz zel azeh. But if they're all on the same footing, how do they need shuz one from the other?
No, they're not on the same footing.
They're not. Who's who?
Mekabel and Daim and Daim means one malach is mekabel from a higher malach that it's ilo.
Then the nice and shuz says.
And then this malach can become a mashpia and noisnim. Yeah. He's talking about all the malachim. So every malach has someone it's makabel from its spiritual parents, so to speak. Gavoya ma'al gavoya ugvoya malay. And then there's the malach as a mashpia. Every malach has the pnimius and the chitzonius. And then the atzmius. What's a shaila?
Because my inner child says that
You should always visit your child,
no, I'm just saying,
especially in Hawaii.
it's stubborn though. Yeah, 'cause she wants to be there.
Sometimes,
Maybe I'm feeding.
no, listen. Sometimes our
Maybe I'm
children,
feeding this Michigan.
sometimes our children are in pain
Yes,
and they're not ready for a relationship.
No, they're very ready. She's begging me to jump.
Okay, so then you should visit. If children are ready for a relationship, we should always embrace it.
Yeah, but
If they're not,
do children tell their
we have to remain patient and not stoop down to chas v'shalom, you know, quid per quo.
I have a good relationship with my daughter. It's a little distant. Should I go 6,000 miles to?
Yeah.
For sure, right? Just say hello and then goodbye.
I wouldn't stay for 10 minutes
No, we're gonna go for Shabbos.
and enjoy it and then make up.
Fun, enjoy it. She's the local shlucha there. She brings people to the bar house.
Gewaltig. So what's the shaila?
Shaila is that it's 10 people, 5 people, 3 people visiting one.
Make a trip out of it.
Comes here.
Make a trip out of it.
Yeah, we could.
Make a geschmacka trip out of
We
it.
could. I mean, just you know.
And you'll be mechazak the kehillah also.
Yeah, right. It's just a very big.
Which city in Hawaii?
I think she was in Honolulu. Where does the shliach?
Honolulu. Rabbi Krasinski.
Yeah.
Itchel.
Yeah, and wine. She does. He's out by Weinbaum.
Gewaldig.
The kids over here. It's nice.
There's a park there called Gan Eden. Garden of Eden.
Yeah. My daughter knows every part. Don't worry.
Wow. It's a moide de kemaimer, huh?
Yeah, it's good.
This one.
Hey, we missed it.
French.
I know, every
Start
day
that
too.
says.
Oh, you missed, make sure you hear the Shia today. Important things. It's a pleasure and honor to have you.
That's what this fresh start has is can transform people. fresh.
Oh yeah, how was it? Was good in Detroit. Fresh start, huh?
Saw the Poimer Road.
Amazing. I saw, yeah.
It brought this creativity, which is
Gewaldig.
stuck in me.
Ah, moide dik.
Yeah,